Now, are you gonna start or?
Yeah, I can start remotely, I guess. And my apologies for not being there in person. Normally I'm remote. I got a bit of vertigo this morning, so I didn't want to collapse in the conference room there. But I see that there's a healthy amount of people there for very good reason, which is to thank Paul for the most generous use of his Metroworks conference room space for, I think, 2+ years at this point. So, Paul, I know you're our featured speaker, but before we turn it over to you, we just kind of want to formally thank you. That's why there's more food than usual there, why there's more people than usual. And Kathleen, I think you've got something, or Barton does. Yeah.
She passed them over to me, so I want to present this, Kathleen, to organize this, the card and a small wrapped ribbon. I didn't know exactly what that meant, but.
Thank you.
And it's actually been more than 2 years. I checked my records because my memory is so good, and January 10th, 2022 was the first time we came to the space. And our featured guest was Paul Joseph.
Popular purpose trivia.
He is bookending our stay at Metroworks, and it's also, you can find it all on the YouTube channel. It's our first YouTube recording. So a lot of, couple of trivia there, but we really do appreciate it. And we'll see what develops for next year. We're gonna keep going somehow. It won't be exactly the same, but we'll see.
Well, there's a sliver of hope. It probably won't be here. I mean, I'm kind of planning for not being here as of Friday, but things are in flux. There might be an extension, there might be another location. I'm still kind of looking at alternatives. So as far as September goes, I'll stay in touch with you, obviously, where I land. The problem is with my original location, which is a 2nd-story walk-up, it's not really accessible, and it doesn't have a conference room of this size, so it's difficult to convene a group like this. So, but yeah.
So anyway, Paul is gonna talk to us today about a number of things. I'm not sure I've got them all, but one is certainly about Metroworks and the past and future of Metroworks. I guess maybe a bit about his personal journey, and I know you also want to talk about the town of Natick, which is near and dear to your heart. And,
Good morning, Paul.
For that and what you're hoping for that. So I'll turn it over to you, and
How are you?
as usual, we'll ask lots of questions. So.
Sure, no problem. I think I know everybody that's here too, so it's great to
Yeah.
see people online.
Martin, I think Paul might have just taken a call, but I heard him say that he had to go early. And that he had a couple of things he wanted to say.
Oh, Paul,
Yeah.
oh, okay, but you want to say them now?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, you'd have to unmute yourself. I can't unmute you.
Yeah, I had muted him because he had just answered a call in his office, but Paul, if you want to go off mute, or he might still be busy, but I'm not sure whether he had said he had things to say, but he had to leave at 9:30.
Yeah, well.
It looks like he's actually on the phone.
Yeah, he is.
Yeah, I think he's occupied right now.
We can kind of use some protocol and either raise his virtual hand or his actual hand, and
Right,
we'll stop and hear what he has to say, because we don't want to,
yeah. And Catherine, I know you have to leave early too, right?
Yes. I'll just slip out.
Yeah.
slip out quietly. Okay,
All right.
now I think we can.
Sure, thanks. And to be honest with you, I kind of just wanted to talk generically about sort of what my decision was around the space, my observations of having run it for the last couple of years. And I'm glad you're here, Catherine. We talked a little bit recently, and then talked to a couple other people just related to town stuff. So I just wanted to kind of share some observations. And at first, my utter bliss of being pretty much detached from a lot of things, because it's given me a lot of opportunity to kind of more deeply listen to what's going on and watch without necessarily being the subject of, or the object of comments online. In some cases, some people won't let things go, but whatever. I don't worry about that too much, but getting to Metroworks first of all, thank you. This was totally unnecessary. When I expanded into this space, for those of you that don't know, Metroworks is the 2nd iteration of something called Native Co-working. And Native Co-working was started by a woman named Liz Reeve. Liz had actually created a community of people that were co-working many years ago, starting at the end of 2014. And that's when I first met her. They were basically meeting at the church at Common Street. They were meeting at the library. They were meeting at coffee shops and whatnot. And at the time, my then business partner, Scott, and I had the space. We just leased the space at 1 South Avenue. And the intention was to actually start more of a consulting practice, do marketing work and strategy work. And I also teach using a simulation, so we thought we'd host some workshops there and really kind of engage in economic development. I was the chair of the EDC at the time, Scott was co-chair, so we got to know each other from volunteering and just got to be friends and business partners. So we partnered with Liz, and basically what happened was we signed the lease at the old location, and then I was recruited for the Metro West Chamber job. So I ended up leaving my business partner at the altar with a brand new lease and no tenants. So Liz being there with coworkers, it was a great opportunity to incubate that and really kind of take what we had thought. Scott and I were talking about this a long time. There were a lot of vacancies in the upper floors in Natick Center. And, you know, a lot of attention was being given to the then cultural district. It was probably year 3 or 4 at that point. The cultural district was in place. And the idea was if we could bring office work and professional work and get us out of our houses, because Scott and I both had home offices and we worked remotely, we'd walk the dogs together and then end up going back. But we both lived within a half mile of downtown. And so this idea of co-working sort of popped up organically with a partnership with me and Scott, but then became a community movement because of Liz's vision and because of what she saw as important. And I really loved that. I had seen it work in other communities as well. I was familiar with WeWork and some other larger international organizations that did the work. So data co-working, very long story short, survived the pandemic. We did open a second location and signed the lease 2 weeks before everything shut down. So actually, Scott and I took a financial bath for a year because we had a lease to we were obligated to without having any revenue stream for 6 months. So that was a tough one. So ended up closing that location, and Scott and I kind of tried to figure things out for a little while, and we basically decided the business wasn't big enough to sustain really any one person. It wasn't spinning up enough cash to generate an income. It was just really kind of paying for office. But at that point, we just were kind of looking for different things. So I ended up buying Scott out of his partnership. He went off to become a mediator. He did Metro West mediation services, and he does that work now. He's loving it. So we still walk the dogs together. So it's a good amicable split of time. But in all of this experience, you know, he and I had always talked about the need for accessibility, the need for a bigger space, the need for the ability really to offer more programs. And when we really talked about co-working, I had always envisioned co-working as just a part of a bigger community and the idea of engagement and things that Liz did bring into her original vision, which is, you know, collaboration, it's communication, it's this idea that you can actually have spontaneous relationships form and foster businesses. And I have to say, when this space opened up, I was actually going to a meeting at the coffee shop next door, and I saw they were pulling the real estate sign off of the window because Coldwell Banker had been here and they didn't renew their lease. And I was like, oh, that space would be perfect for co-working. So I jumped on it without really having a plan, which is everything nobody should do as an entrepreneur, is jump in without a plan. You know, what I found was, you know, I wanted to just start. We'll figure it out as we go. Had enough runway financially to kind of get it started. And the hope was that people would see the, you know, co-working and understand the model. And it took longer than I expected to get things running, but I did hit a point. It was actually this past January that I finally broke even on this space. But this space was difficult from an operations standpoint because it's not big enough to do exactly what I wanted it to do, but it's too small or it's too big to do, you know, I think private offices and like people just want their own kind of contained area. So it's always been sort of a conundrum for me in terms of how do I bring the best of everything together. And truthfully, I've been a little scattered. I've served on the select board for half the time I've been here. And I've been trying to do my own work as well, which I wanted to talk a little bit about that today too, which I think some of you will find interesting. But in running the space and making it available, and Martin, thank you for sharing that data. The Coffee with a Purpose is my longest running tenant. So, I have some coworkers at the other location that have been there for about 9 years, but
And clearly we got the best rate.
I'm not sure that was the
which
best
explains my
return on investment.
Yeah, you can't survive necessarily on it all, but to me, honestly, this was as much of a social mission as it was a business interest. You know, I found coming out of the pandemic, people weren't talking to each other; they were talking through or at each other. Definitely online. I'm preaching to the choir with this group. You know, I know you're all engaged in the community in different ways, and I just found it very disconcerting that we lost a lot during the pandemic, and just in terms of civility and the ability to see people and really look each other in the eye and be accountable to what we say to people. You know, it seems to have gotten worse in some cases, it seems to have gotten better in others, but what was really important to me symbolically about this space was the location on the common, the fact that, you know, we have these amazing windows that get sunlight. We can see the vibrancy of Natick Center itself. And I just kind of fell in love with the idea that we've got a common and a place. And so reaching out to Coffee with a Purpose was a no-brainer in terms of kicking off this space. So thank you all for keeping it going and for what you're doing with this community, because I think at the end of the day, it's not about the place, it's not about the physical thing, it's about the engagement that it's allowed. But I think the physical place helped foster that a little bit, and I'd like to see that continue. You know, as far as sort of next steps, I'm committed to keeping the other place open, so that's not going anywhere. So my original location is at 1 South Avenue. It's a second story right at the corner of Adams Street and South Ave. And as I said, I've had a few longtime members there, have a couple of offices, but it's a smaller space than this. I do expect to see some turnover over the next couple of months as people over there and people that have been working here come together. I'll definitely keep some and lose some, and I know there's been a couple of new members that have joined and they're excited to move over there. So the business will go on, and the business is fine as far as that goes. But I do please keep an eye open for opportunities like that. I think what's challenging about this kind of space, and it's going to segue into my next sort of comments about economic development. For this to work, you know, you either have to own a building or you have to have a revenue share with a landlord, somebody that has the structure in place, and we just don't have it. You know, and just with a couple of you here that are influencers on this, part of why you're here is the library doesn't open early enough to host a group like this. And I think about the library, I think about the community senior center, I think about the assets that we have in town. And when I served on the select board from 21 to 24, I know there was a very contentious conversation about the use of the kitchen at the community center. I think one of the things I've observed and have gotten some distance on since leaving is a sort of disconnect between what we need to do to operate a town professionally and what so many, including many in this room, or people that have been participating in Coffee with a Purpose have brought, which is the community runs the community, right? So we as volunteers in so many ways have custodianship of our assets of the town. Yet there seems to be this kind of disconnect. We do things because we have to do things because of legal reasons or because of staffing reasons or because of cost reasons. But I also still see so many opportunities in town where the people, the community members themselves aren't being served by these public assets as well as they could be. So I think about Open Door, and Carrie, I know you're Sergeant at Arms with our Rotary Club, and the Rotary supports Open Door every week. And I know that's sort of a revolving sort of place finding to go for a while, different places hosting it.
I don't know what Open Door is.
Oh, sure. You probably know the better history than
Yeah,
I, so we can explain what it is.
Rotary just plays once a month, but at the Elks Club over on Speen Street, we provide a free meal to about 40 to 60 people, maybe depending on, you know, and it's, there's one group, John and Joe.
Gary, can you speak up a bit?
Yeah.
The mic's over here, Karen.
Yeah, I shouldn't just speak. Yeah, Open Doors over at the Elks Club on Speen Street. It's offers a free dinner on Monday nights for, I think, 9 months out of the year, and it kind of rotates in terms of who does it. John and Joan Bass, I guess, is the people who started it. Alan, help me out, Alan, from our Rotary, is the one who kind of represents us.
Yes.
So Nate Rotary, you know, is there once a week and once a month, and does a meal for about 40 to 60 people there on a regular basis. It's for really anyone in Natick that wants to come and have a hot meal. Typically, it's a low income people that come there. It's a really great event for them. They look forward to it every week.
Yep. And while I was on the select board at the time, they were looking to host it at the community center, and because of, you know, legal reasons, you know, there's concerns about who stores the food, who takes ownership of things, you know, if there's a foodborne illness, who's responsible for that. So again, you get into the minutia of all of the what ifs. And, you know, one of the concerns that I have is, you know, Natick has always been a wonderful microcosm of this country. And sometimes I think the good or the perfect gets in the way of the good enough, right? And that's something I know, getting a lot of nods in the room. I don't know the answer to that, but it really kind of hit home. And the more I start thinking about, well, what has to change? You know, my fear is that we've got a new generation, a lot of new people in Natick in particular, that don't have an appreciation or a connection to a lot of the volunteerism that has made this community what it is. And I think people's time has gotten so scarce that it's hard to find people that are willing to give continuous time to volunteering. And to me, all the more reasons, I've seen improvements at town meeting, I think reaching out, I think through the efforts of people, just newer people joining, or at least aware of what's going on. Now, they might be aware of it for positive or negative reasons, but they're aware of it. We'll get into governance later if you want, but you all know my view on governance. But leaving this space in particular, for me, it was a hard decision because I didn't want to let go of the symbolism of it. And I think I had to do it just for personal reasons, but I also, for good reasons too. I'm going to be going back to school in the fall as well. So I'm just going to be, in terms of time, what I learned was, as much as I like being an owner of a business and an operator of a business, I can't do that and actually run a different business, right? So I wasn't all in here. So everything about what didn't work out is definitely on my time management and sort of that ability to not be in two places at once. So ironically, when I had to get work done, I do it from home because I couldn't work in my own co-working space. So, yeah. So anyway, so yeah, I guess I don't have a particular conclusion to what I was saying, but it just that thanks to each of you for what you've done and continue to do in your volunteerism in so many different ways. But I see it even more and more at the beginning of this year with the change of the administration and the uncertainty in the economy. I lost a few members that were here, and part of the reason I have to get rid of this space in particular is a couple of major members on fairly short notice departed, and that was a wake-up call to me about something bigger, because these were software companies that were backed by venture capital. And so the uncertainty that their investors projected to them, and the uncertainty of the managers of those companies' ability to commit to hiring people and sustaining even interns, really trickled down fast. And that was an eye-opener. I was really shocked by how quickly what I felt was positive momentum coming into 2025 changed. And I don't want to be political about it. I'm just being fairly economic about that. So a lot of that uncertainty, that volatility that hit, affected everybody. And I could see it in just, the individuals that were self-employed. I could see it in the individuals that were employed by a remote office, and then they were paid to basically have a membership here. And then I could see it by the entrepreneurs that were here as well, that people that wanted to start a company, they stopped coming. Like there were people that basically engage with people. So I lost a little of that, and that kind of triggered a discussion. As some of you know, I was the interim executive director of the Natick Center Cultural District. So with Heather being there now, and she's doing an amazing job, my concern about Natick Center, we look at all the development that's going on. There's been a very protracted amount of for lease signs up on windows. There's going to be a big one on this window soon. Again, like I said, I'm working with the landlord to figure that out. And I am nervous about our inability to move quickly or meet the moment with agility. And for me, that I think is the biggest thing. And I know Catherine and I talked about this for a long time, just in terms of what needs to happen. I'm still the chair of the Economic Development Committee. And in fact, last meeting that we had last week was essentially what are we? What are we trying to accomplish? What have we been able to accomplish? And the truth of the matter is, structurally, as a volunteer committee that reports to a select board, we don't have a budget. We don't have a specific charge other than trying to help bring the voice of business to the governance of the town. But in terms of effectiveness, the committee's been in existence now for 16 years. And really, other than convening and we've done some networking events and gotten to know some of the businesses. And we've brought, endorsements for different things at town meeting. We've actually brought a couple of articles ourselves to the warrant. That to me is another example of how governance has slowed us down. Like many better performing communities have private EDCs, or they have private economic entities of some sort that provide the outside in pressure and urgency to town government. And I think because that's been of town government, it's been ineffective in moving things, I think, with better speed. for me, most notably, I don't think the composition of that board is as good as it can be, because a lot of people that work in the private sector don't want to engage in a public process for giving their feedback, because eventually they have to come before the select board or the Board of Health or the planning board or the ZBA.
Yeah.
So if they voice their opinions in front of those people in public, they basically could be harming a future decision. And so it's by design, it's really kept us from moving forward. And I look at the work that the cultural district is doing and the board is intending to do with economic development, which is good. It's important for downtown, but it doesn't have the scale and it certainly doesn't have the speed that I think we need to support town-wide growth. So coming out of the EDC meeting last week, we talked about the need for an economic vision for the town, right? That was one thing that the staff, Amanda Loomis, the director of the Community and Economic Development Office, and Morgan Griffiths, who basically works with us on the EDC and the cultural district. I asked them earlier this year, I said, what are the 2 or 3 things we can be doing to support the work that you're doing? And one of the things they came back with was your vision. What is the economic development vision for the town? And I think that's a tricky one. I think it's an important one to answer. I'm glad the select board chair is here, because that could go into goals. And I think there's just so many things that are priorities right now. How do you choose between 5 number 1 priorities, right? When you're going on. So you look very well put together and very poised today too, given what the enormous you deal with. So. Catherine Kaufman is the epitome of outwardly calm until she's not, but that's
And then it's awful.
exactly. It's a steep drop from there.
Yeah, there's no in between, is there?
A quick question for you, maybe not a quick question. I don't know if others have heard the same thing, sort of casually, coffee chats and formal things. People look at all the new buildings and all the lease signs, and they kind of assume that there's a vision of economic development that's important, but we don't know what it is. And I mean, outside of, hoping for, selfish things like new restaurants or, something to get us to use all of this stuff, and providing housing, which is, 3/4 of what's gone in, is terrific. I mean, I think some of these places are really nice, and, at future point, I would look at it. So I'd love to live in town. I think that's great. So I've been happy with it, but then I'm hearing, bits and pieces of things, not a lot, because but I speak to just about anyone. And they're sort of like, what's going on? Is it part of why are we doing all this? Why all of a sudden is there all this new building that, I mean, the zoning I've been aware of, and somewhat of how this has developed in the last 5 years.
Yep.
I'm proud of it. But I guess it wasn't you're saying it wasn't from a vision from the economic development side?
Not from our committee
Not from the
specifically.
committee, it was, okay.
No, and I think what you demonstrated is exactly the challenge we've got. Everything you see in downtown Natick right now, while it has happened with support and facilitation. So take the St. Pat's building, for example. That project was a long time coming, but part of the hang up and part of the outcome of that, a pre-existing select board had basically worked with the developer to say, we want a restaurant. So they basically addressed the issue of making sure there'd be a liquor license available for that location. So there are elements of things that we do deliberately, right, in support of that. And I think the overarching view of economic development has been informed by either Natick 2030 or, the 360 strategic plan before that. We do on occasion have these massive community surveys and we ask people, what do you want? And it always says the same things, right? We want restaurants, we want walkability, we want safety, we want, right, all of that. And housing, affordable housing is definitely key. I think in a lot of ways, Amanda's doing an amazing job and there's so much work to be done cleaning up and then adjusting the bylaws to allow for that kind of development. So I know she's going to go to town meeting this fall with some zoning changes for West Natick to help with the housing along from Mill Street out to Framingham. So that's a good example of there is deliberate effort, but in terms of an overarching vision, there isn't one that's driving it. I think it's somewhat opportunistically. I think there's sort of a checklist, if you will. And as far as what you've seen downtown, these are all private initiatives, right? Private property, government can only do so much in terms of, in providing a stimulation for private investment.
Maybe you're gonna get to it with your pile of books or something else later, so I don't want to delay you, but I'd be curious just what sort of other towns kind of visions have been. you know, what's a town near us that we could relate to or see or something that might offer a vision, maybe not our vision, but.
Paul, could I add on to that question?
Yeah,
So in the towns that you're going to mention, could you talk about the form of governance when you address work?
Yeah,
But can you tie in the 2030 plan?
Oh, and you were on these, right?
yeah, I'll start with the Middle East and work my way back. So,
somebody asked you.
I think there's some good examples and things we can learn from. When we created the Economic Development Committee in 2009, Marlborough had just finished its second strategic plan. And Marlborough is a city form of government. It has been for 100 years. It didn't change to do these things, but it also had the luxury or the concern of a lot of vacancies and a lot of open space. So they deliberately created an economic development corporation, which basically used their local options taxes to create a private 501c6 nonprofit, which essentially does some of the functions of the city's planning work and does all of the economic development work. So you take Marlborough, for example, of why it moved so quickly. They moved quickly because they basically have the engagement of the private sector that can do so without being subject to open meeting law. They can give blunt feedback in meetings and things like that, which help inform a plan. You also have a mayoral form of government in their case. So I know the former mayor, Arthur Vigent, used to go to trade shows for biotech, for example, and help sell the town. Right, so you had a sales force and you had a marketing arm selling that city, right? So that's why, you know, I remember vividly in 2009, one of the first things I said at economic development was, I never want to see that Boston Scientific building go vacant. And sure enough, within a month, Boston Scientific was poached to go to Marlborough, right? So these are the problems we had. And then BJ's left. And I did happen to meet the CEO of BJ's. You know how I did that? I walked in. Just a cold call, because I was curious about what was going on, because I wanted to see redevelopment, what is now ABI Labs. We've got a thriving life sciences sector behind Sherwood Plaza. At the time used to be BJ's Wholesale Club's corporate headquarters, so they left. So we've been relying on volunteerism, and even to this point, I'll come back to last week's meeting in a moment, but in terms of how it relates to the strategic plan, Cindy, and sort of other forms of government, I think other forms of government can work. I would also say, I look at Wellesley, and Wellesley's done an amazing job attracting restaurants. They've also permitted and developed an area called Linden Street, right? So Linden Square development has been thriving. Now, they're still a town meeting form of government. They have affluence and they have involvement, but I think they've also just hosted their second ever annual Taste of Wellesley at the Wellesley Country Club with 25 new restaurants that have opened there in the last couple of years. So what we're losing in some ways because the affluent and attractive community upstream from us has put a dam on the road a little bit. Right, so Natick is at risk right now, I think, because we're sort of in between these two worlds of a Wellesley and a Marlborough. Framingham is doing some good things in pockets, but the enormity of changes in Framingham is going to take time too. And I think what we've also missed the opportunity to do is joint development with Framingham. So prior to the pandemic, the town of Natick and the city of Framingham had partnered to do a study of the Golden Triangle, which is basically Speen Street out to Route 26. So it's that whole Shoppers World Natick Mall area. And some pretty good stuff came out of that in terms of what we need to think about for the workforce of the future, for transit improvements, for you know, the changing face of retail. The problem was the mayor of Framingham at the time and the select board at the time, they were too busy dealing with other things, and then the pandemic hit to adopt the plan. So coming out of there, we did have on our agenda, even when I was serving on the board, let's rekindle the Golden Triangle study. I don't know if you can give a quick update on it, but I know it was put on hold. We had engaged a consultant and they had started to basically update that plan based on post-pandemic realities. Unfortunately, Framingham wasn't willing to share the work at that point. So I know it's been a sort of an initiative of Natick's undertaking only, but.
So
we
the
did phase
update
one.
on that is MBTA communities hit. So the CED office was all consumed with rezoning and getting us in compliance for MBTA. So that was a whole year process, keeping in mind that since town meeting meets twice a year, all of that has to be done just twice a year. So the Golden Triangle study is on for next spring to start work on that. We need to get through fall town meeting.
So.
Can I ask a real quick question, Tom? I know you worked in Maine to try and, update the whole charter, town's charter. But sometimes,
Got it.
is that in itself somewhat restrict what the EDC can do? Would it be, if the charter was looked at and kind of revalued, maybe there's an opportunity to kind of inform an EDC that might be more like what you described, Margaret?
Yes and no. I think you can have a private EDC or a private EDIC, Economic Development Industrial Corporation. And EDIC is kind of governed by the state. So there's very specific ways to create that based on blight and underutilized spaces. Framingham actually just got $50,000 of state money to rekindle their EDIC. So there's state money available.
Just seems like a lot of the roadblocks here in Natick is because the charter.
That's part of it. I would argue it's not for the economic development piece so much as what happens. I always value the privacy of an EDC as a sales arm, right? We can basically attract businesses to Natick and sell the vision of Natick to the outside. We can be a target for consultants that work with site location people for corporations that want to come here. But our job ends when we put that prospect in the funnel. Town hall's job begins when they're in the funnel. How do you get them through the process and all of that? And that's where governance comes in, because I think the efficiency and the ability to focus, right? To Catherine's point just now, if to do major business, if we have to tweak a bylaw or do something, we have to wait 6 months, right? And to get to town meeting. And then you're asking a business to wait 6 months on the possibility that town meeting will pass it as opposed to continue it, right? So the unpredictability and the long time window has put us at a competitive disadvantage many times over. And that's been my case for many years on this. To be honest with you, that's it. You're getting now to the community aspect of the charter. I've been so disappointed. I actually completely withdrew from the charter commission process. I know there's a handful of people that are going to keep it going and try to collect signatures still. But we had a great head of steam when it first started. I think people intuitively understand the need for it. And we got in excess of, I'd say 93-94% of elected people signed the petition to put a charter commission on the ballot. The problem was getting beyond the people that are plugged in. How do you reach those people? You need marketing. Well, you need money for that. Well, when you went to the corporations to ask for money so we could do large scale mailings and donations, they didn't want to be involved in anything political. And I said, well, it's apolitical because this is about asking if people want to create one. It's just a question. There's nothing about that. However, the timing of that coincided with the emergence of the national election and the polarization. I had literally members of the Republican town committee, the Democratic town committee, people willing to help, working together. As soon as the political national divide amplified, everybody went away. I don't want my face on the website, this person's face on the website. I don't want to do this work anymore because you just want to be mayor. I was trying to do it in a very, very objective way, and it was impossible to overcome that. And to me, that's what's so sad about this. And it's, I think, inevitable. It's a political process. I mean, if you're talking about government, by definition, it is. But the fact that we as a
Oh, I wanted to ask you about the flexibility of town meeting, because if I'm hearing correctly, you were saying that some of what we struggle with is that when we want to make a change and then we tell a business, well, you got to wait 6 months to see whether town meeting approves it. But you were also saying that Wellesley is organized by town meeting and at least seems to be nimble in terms of attracting restaurants. Are there changes that we can make within the town meeting structure that would, or like, are there things we could learn from Wellesley's organization where we wouldn't have to not be a town meeting, but we could still be more nimble than we are?
I don't think it's binary, Doug. I think the problem is that and this goes back to what Catherine just said. I just think we have different kinds of problems in Natick. And I think our challenges are different than Wellesley's challenges. I think Wellesley also they're damn lucky to be contain and be bordered by a total of 3 global colleges. Right, so they've got parents coming in regularly, they've got visitors and faculty and students that are basically walking to those places. So you've got a density of population in Wellesley that will help it thrive. I don't think they have the same latent challenges that Natick does. They don't have the mall, they don't have the army base, they don't have the dam, they don't have Route 927, right? So there are all kinds of things that we have that they don't, that I think slow down. So I think it just compounded. I think town meeting has done a good job improving the process. I think the time, my observation has been, I haven't been attending, but I've seen, it looks like it's happening in fewer meetings. The meetings look like they're more efficient, but I argued with this from the get-go, just because you're tuning up the engine in the vehicle doesn't mean it's the right vehicle. Right, and so you can have an underperforming vehicle performing as well as it can, but if you're putting a small sports car on something that you really need a long haul truck, it doesn't help you. So to me, that's the challenge. Is I don't think the model is right in general. So making town meeting better could help. I will say, then I don't know if, Catherine has anything new to add, but, in my time serving on the select board, my observation, and I know the town manager himself has said, staff spends 60 to 70% of their time responding to or preparing for a town meeting. So when you've got your very lean paid staff spending more than half of their time getting questions answered for curious members of the public, they're not doing their jobs. Right? I mean, we've hired them to do certain things. And to me, that's where it's like, and then you hammer them for not doing their jobs. They get dispirited in the work. They don't want to be here. So, it's hard enough to find municipal professionals. It's a unvirtuous circle, right? That they kind of create there because of it. Has it gotten better? Again, I'm not to judge because I haven't been a town meeting member for a few years.
Paul, can I have a quick update before I run?
Sure.
I met with the moderator for lunch on Friday. And he has some really exciting things planned for town meeting. I'm really pumped. So he's going to convene the CRBC, the Charter Review and Bylaw Committee, to specifically study charter changes and bylaw changes that will allow hybrid meeting. And in the short period of time from fall town meeting till January, they are going to explore this, talk to companies to find out what the cost will be, work with Pegasus, and then bring that cost to the town administration to be included in the fiscal budget that's presented on February 1, so that spring town meeting could be hybrid. It may not be fully hybrid in spring. It's a very ambitious goal, but definitely by next fall, which will increase participation and transparency, so many other things, and invite other people who are no longer, or who aren't able to participate because they can't get babysitters. So those are, and some other really exciting changes. So I'm very happy with Jeff's work, his vision for where we can be.
And I'm just happy we have a digital artifact of somebody saying, I'm super pumped for town meeting.
That's gonna come back to bite me.
Yes, it
is.
Yeah, of course. Thanks. Good to see you.
Thanks.
Yeah, so, again, I keep coming back to the theme of community, and to me, I love town meeting. I love this. I love the history of it. I love what it has done to create the Natick that we all love. But I also think what got us here won't get us there. And that's, the how we get to the vision of that's in 2030, and 2030 is coming up fast. So that even needs to be revisited with people that, from the director of communications, I think he said 30% or 40% of the population of Natick has turned over since the pandemic. Wow.
No.
So when you think about that, think about the implications of that on our schools, on just the sort of attachment to the town.
But that's actually a good segue to the other question I wanted to ask was, how about this old Natick, new Natick battle? I mean, just about any major change, or even not major change, the voices that cry out is like, oh, we can't do this, we can't do that. Why people constantly want to be changing things. When you talked about how much of town meetings or town officials' time was spent just preparing for town meeting, I'm guessing a bunch is also spent just trying to respond to all of those voices. How do we resolve that? In that statistic that you just quoted, I guess that just hammers home even more that these is a smaller and smaller minority with a louder and louder voice. Is that what's going on? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know if, I think there's always been a small minority with a disproportionate share of the mic, as far as that goes, but is it getting worse? I mean, to be honest with you, I kind of defer to some of you in the room because I've blissfully been detached for the last few months, but I would say it's getting nastier in more narrow arenas. That's been my observation. So You think about the Johnson School controversy, you think about the school committee's role, addressing the Middle East stuff and how that integrates into the curriculum and how we support children. My frustration as an outsider that came to government, a politician says that, I know I'm an elected official, but I'm still not I try to be as apolitical as possible, but I always feel like, if everyone stayed in their lane and actually did what the system was designed to do, things would work better. Washington is completely dysfunctional for a lot of reasons, but I think the biggest problem we've got right now is that you're legislating from the judiciary, you're executing from the legislature, everyone's kind of crossed the three branches, so it becomes sort of muddled from that. And my observation in Natick has been that sometimes the scope of what we try to do, and I felt into it a little bit when I first got elected to the select board. I see Ricky is on the call here. I'd love to hear a perception of the board back then, but we want to do big things. But the truth is, we're policymakers, right? But then when we get involved in so many different things, I think it overreaches. Doug, so I think, from the standpoint of, does that create problems? Yeah, because I think you're creating a political dust up where you didn't need one, right? So, I mean, I take, personally speaking, and you crucify me off the record or off the call if you want later, but it's like when the school committee undertook the flagpole discussion, for example, the very simple approach that I saw was keep the American flagpole the way it is and have a second flagpole. Right. And so by going right after, it's important to have all flags on the one pole. I think they created an intensity around an argument that could have served more people. And so I think it's interesting. So you're giving me a segue to my first book. I was waiting for the host to talk about these things. So one of the books I read this summer is a book called Abundance by Ezra Klein. Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson wrote this book, and those of you, everybody I talked to said, "Oh, I haven't read the book, but I know Ezra Klein." I've heard of Ezra Klein until I read the book. I wasn't really familiar, but this book talks literally about we can have economic development, we can have a sustainable future, we can have equity, and we can do all of these things far beyond what we think we can do right now. The problem is that, again, the perfect gets in the way of the good. I think the most important example that they bring in here, and they're two admitted liberal economists. So they wrote this book from the perspective of a liberal leaning economist, and they crucified the high-speed rail initiative in California as an example of where the perfect gets in the way of the good and hypocrisy gets in the way of the good, right? So take, for example, they've been trying to get high-speed rail from San Francisco to LA for 20 years now. And part of the problem they've got through the Obama administration, the Biden administration, there was billions of dollars thrown at this, and Newsom and Brown before him. There's so much attempt to get this done, but they basically barely laid track because you get to affluent communities around San Francisco, it's like, well, we're politically liberal, but we don't want the train running through our field. So they're zoned against putting rail in. So half of the money that's been spent has been spent on legal fees and fighting battles that were put up by liberal resistance to the very high-speed rail they preach they want. In the meantime, Texas and Florida lead the country in high-speed rail deployments. So you look at these red states that are getting it right, and a blue state like California can't get it done between two of the most important cities on the West Coast. Why is that? And
China's built something like 2 million miles of high-speed trains.
It's insane.
In 5 years.
Yeah, so they went from zero to, into like Buck Rogers' future, with high-speed rails. But China has
Same thing with, electric cars.
Yeah.
And now
All
with
it's AI,
AI.
the whole thing about China, how we're just getting our asses kicked.
Yeah, but China also has an authoritarian government that basically said, we're gonna move your city and you have no choice. And you're gonna move to a city that we built 10 years ago, but haven't populated yet, or whatever it's gonna be, right? It's crazy how they can do things. Yeah, I read a book years ago called Innovation Nation that talked about that. It was after the .com bubble.
They built a hospital in 2 days.
2 days, right, exactly. So things can be done. I think about how long it took us to just pave North and South Main Streets, or think about how long it took us to get the rights to develop
They
the
got
rail trail.
Beijing ready for the Olympics and now.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
we used to be able to do that.
Yes.
Right.
There's a mill that I worked on up in Methuen. And it used to, it would go dry in the summer because the river would run dry, and the guys that ran it said, if we could put a couple dams here, we could control the the river, keep the mill running all year. And within like 3 or 4 years, they had gotten all the rights to 10 miles up the river, built a whole bunch of dams, had the thing running. Do you know, have any idea? It's just, you could not do that today. Whether you should do that is a different question.
Right.
But you could not.
Couldn't.
5 years to
You're
take the
talking
dam
about putting
down.
a dam, forget it.
Yeah, no,
That would not be.
But just the idea of the permitting that would be
Yeah.
necessary today.
Right.
The permitting, I went to a lunchtime, lunch and learn thing at work with a lawyer who dealt with permitting. And he brought in a list of all the permits you need to do a major project. And you need this permit before you can get that permit, but you can't get that permit until you have this permit. And it's no wonder
Right.
it takes so long.
Yeah, it's this, right, and
Yeah.
that was when I first served on the EDC, one of the criticisms I had heard from a lot of people was. We go to, either a planning board or ZBA meeting, they tell us that they want certain changes, we hire architects, we hire attorneys, we hire engineers to come in and make those changes, and then we go back and. One person on the whim says, I think the diameter of that circle should be 20 feet instead of 24 feet. Somebody who doesn't have professional training and just wants the aesthetic of something because they feel like it. So this company is now out millions of dollars of time, money, project-based time, and all that. So this is a good example where governance does come in, right? What are our expectations and how do we work well together?
Bring it back to local politics. I decided to sit on town meeting the final night and see how Jeff was compared to Brian. They spent 15 or 20 minutes debating a comma in one, sentence.
See, and if that doesn't give you pause, I don't know what, so.
I would
Thank
say
you.
the grammar police had big things of popcorn during that session. Totally enjoyed it.
Yeah.
It was, let's go home now.
Yeah.
I'll say, if you don't want to read the whole book, Derek Thompson and Ezra Klein did an episode on it. And
Oh,
you
did they?
can find that either on the New York
Yeah.
Times, if you subscribe, or on Substack.
Awesome,
It's worth listening to, probably twice.
nice. Yeah, no, it's really important stuff, and I take that, I've always
The book's
taken
in-
that
the book's in the
mindset.
library right now. It's in a 7-day read, so
Yeah.
it's not that long a book.
Yeah, no, it's a quick read, that's what I think, I have a lot of books, people think I read a lot, I don't read a lot, every once in a while, I read mostly nonfiction, and when I get into a topic that I love, I typically devour the book, so it's one of those things, but I try to find books that don't have small print.
Yeah. me too.
Just to follow up on, I think it maybe was Doug's question, but, I've had interactions with maybe old native people, cause I live on Lincoln, so right next to the development of the new building there. One of the policemen who was monitoring traffic. And all three of these people, all men, all have like probably 50s and 60s, grew up here in Natick. Bemoaning all the new people that are moving into Natick and all these new apartment buildings and how it's just ruining Natick. So one is a policeman, one is a tree company pruning, whatever, that kind of stuff, and the other is a landlord.
Yep.
Um,
I know, yeah, I mean, look. Everybody wants things the way they think they remember it, right?
Yes.
I don't usually name names, but I will say, and I had a really good friendship with Jimmy Brown. Yeah, who grew up, some of you know, from town meeting and grew up in Natick. He was sort of at the front of the Redmen debate when the change of the Natick Redmen to the Red Hawks was there. And I remember Jimmy, we didn't get along on politically on a lot of things. Like typically I'd stand up and say something, he'd say the exact opposite in town meeting. It's like, but we would always grab a cup of coffee or beer afterwards. I think like we were friends. And I will say, there were moments in talking to him that even he acknowledged, change is inevitable. And he was a great voice for his peers and his mom's generation and all of those people that grew up in Natick. And I always respected that. But he also acknowledged that, look at what the cultural district has done. We didn't have this common when I was growing up. So if you take an honest look at history, I think people have in their mind's eye a very romantic notion of what was. And look, give me one town in this country that doesn't look radically different than it did, 50 years ago, right? And that to me is one of the challenges. Now, I do find it rich that people that are essentially paying for their livelihoods from this growth
Yeah,
are complaining
Yeah.
about this growth.
yeah.
I I can't be critical of people wanting things a certain way. That's everybody's preference. But to me, part of what I love about Natick is that it is growing, it is vibrant, it is a place where we can have these conversations. And I love the community, I really do. I had, my mom came up this weekend, actually, went to lunch at Eli's, we walked through the farmer's market, and I'm walking around, I'm like, this is where I wish my parents would age in place, you know, this is the place I want them to be. And so everyone has a difference of opinion on that. You could also argue, well, the traffic is bad and all the negatives that people bring up. And to me, that comes into sort of where you focus, which you mentioned something about time. These are my other 2 books, but I'll get to those in a minute. But my typical conversation with somebody who's a multi-generational resident of Natick or comes from a family is that we want the same things. How you achieve them in today's reality are very different than how you can achieve them in post-World War II thriving America, right? We're just in a different political climate, we're in a different environment, we're in a different density, right? So this idea of all of these people, the powers that be, you know, we talked about there's no concert behind economic development. What I find laughable is that they want us to be a city. They want this and they want that is what a lot of what I see older generation Native people saying about things online. Like I'm part of this, you know, cabal of people that are politicians in town.
Deep town.
Huh? Deep town, exactly. Yeah, it's a deep town. I think people would be shocked to realize how actually detached I am from most of the people I've served with. They think we sit in a room somewhere underground and they plot out the next 2 years in Natick. And I'm not. I'm just, you know, I'm cordial with many of them. I'm not close friends with most, but we work well together. But to me, it's because we want the same things. But now we lock horns over how, right? I want bicyclists to feel safe riding on Main Street. We are now in phase 2 of a 3 or 4 phase project to redo Main Street. And I know there are people that said, if you take away parking, you're gonna kill downtown. Well, you know, if we do this, then do that. There's nothing that's inevitable. It's how do we do it? It's not about if, and people want bike lanes. People are on electric bikes. There's a new mode of transportation that's taking over right now. So if we don't plan for it, we should plan for more fatalities because it's going to be worse. And we just came off of 2 projects that are basically dumping people, bicyclists into Natick Center with no connectivity that's clear. So North Main Street's done, South Main Street's done, but what are we doing in the middle? We have to address it somehow. And so to me, it's a how do we come together and do that? I think the town is doing better job in general of transparency. I think, you know, I've seen, you know, I'll take the Johnson School example. I mean, love or hate the decision to close Johnson School. I will say, since it became under the custody of the select board and the town administrator's office, I've seen a plan mapped out. I've seen communications go out. I've seen community engagement happening. Now, I don't know, I can't speak to it specifically and feel free to chime in or not, because again, what's going on in those communications, how people are being, you know, conveyed, you know, information and so forth. There might be opinions on that, but just in terms of process, I've never seen a more sincere and
Part of that is
deliberate.
definitely Jay. Jay is
For
much
sure.
better.
Jay is
to do
100%
stuff
gonna
to
push
just-
it.
To just
Yeah.
go without a lot of, can I?
Absolutely.
you know,
I
would
think
this
the
be-
frustration
And
is
that's what we
that,
needed.
is that the process is finally warranting and capable of large or easier participation, and yet it's still getting the same smaller, consistent all the time voices. So it's not actually, you know, it's not actually reaching the people that live way over there and way up there and some of the ones way down there, because they're some of the always vocal voices, but not. I think that it's an interesting figuring out the transition. We've all been complaining of wanting a better way to get the information out and to have the transparency, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And now that that is there with this, it's okay, but you said you would come if we built it. And yet here it's being built and we're not seeing you come,
Takes time.
right?
Right.
So I think that's where
The you being public.
the new being, it's an actual process where you actually can go have your voice heard.
Right.
And there aren't people coming and bringing their voice.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Is what I mean.
Yeah, exactly.
Right,
Yeah.
it was, I didn't get enough time to say this,
Yeah.
and yet it's the same people. Coming to say things.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a microcosm of here. mean, a tiny microcosm of what could develop here. And there's some exciting stuff hidden around this place. Like I went over and visited Bloom and Grove, right over in your old neighborhood. I had no idea that was there. Of course, I mean, my grandchildren don't live here, but they did. It's a very interesting concept.
Great
It was hatched in town in some sort of an incubator by two brothers. And, you know, that
Started
kind
at Ten Trees, I mean, at that hive, which is now Ten Trees, so it's,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, but there are loads of things that could vitalize that thing that I think are exciting. So it's got me looking around and trying to come up with things because, I mean, I'm talking to people about it.
And that awareness is the biggest part. I think right now, actually, I will get to that. I haven't finished this one book, but this is called The Siren's Call. And subtext is how attention became the world's most endangered resource.
Oh.
And so it's written by Chris Hayes, who I guess was an anchor on a news program at MSNBC rather, yeah. And so it's that I got turned on to because I'm self-diagnosed ADD. And so this notion of attention, and one of the co-working members that has been here was a video game that helped people with attention by training the brain to focus on what you need to focus on and actually filter out what you don't need to focus on. But this idea of intention as currency, we're bankrupt right now, and we're fighting a losing battle, right? I mean, I think
Democrats.
the channel, everybody is. I think that the problem is that we're all walking around like this, and that goes back to how we open this conversation is I love this. I love having people in the room. I love having people connected. But you're a unique population in that you've committed to this hour and a half once a week to talk to one another. I mean, it's rare right now.
We also collectively have time,
Yes.
which is a big difference, because I have a lot of people who said, oh my gosh, that sounds really great, but 9 o'clock on a Monday morning. So, and I'm not criticizing that for us, but I'm just saying.
We all
You
have
know,
4,000 Weeks is the other book that I've read.
Yeah.
And this was recommended to me by a woman who worked in Natick Center.
What is,
Oliver Berkman. It's called 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals. So
what
it
is
is
4,000? That's how many weeks you have
To live.
your life?
Yeah, 80 years, basically. Everyone has got 4,000 weeks, give or take, right? Is sort of the premise of it, and how we think about time. You know, how we got conditioned to make it a clock, and how we got conditioned to the hour and the task and all these other things. So this isn't a book about setting your calendar up to be more efficient. It's about picking a task and it's gonna take as much time as it's gonna take. Right? And as a project manager, product manager, it was a nightmare of me to start this, because it's like, you know, you're managing multiple constituencies. I'm constantly wrestling with, there's a pure way of doing things and the way it should be done. And then there's the human sort of, how do you put things in a system of people? Right? And those are actually my other two books. So one is sort of a Buddhist thing called Living Untethered, and another one is Business Model Generation, which is a framework for setting up businesses. So thank you all for bringing me through my list. I knew I'd get to all of them in some way of the conversation, but these are the things that kind of, as I think about things holistically, I've been frustrated with our structure, obviously town meeting and the inability to get things done through systems. But I think a big part of it is exactly that, Rick and Brindley. It's like, you know, we all have choices to make, right? Unfortunately, a lot of the choices we're making are because we're choosing to stay wrapped up in what we think we have to do. And I also admittedly have the epiphany now of both of my kids out of school and my daughter being a good example of somebody who's been programmed since she was 4. Right? I mean, she was basically a hockey player and we were a hockey family, and she went to college and she played hockey and now she's done. And my biggest fear for her was, what are you going to do when you don't have to get up and play hockey? Right? And she's a great student. She's got a lot of other things going on. And but to me, it's a good example. Whereas my son also was an athlete. He graduated Natick High in 2018. He chose not to play club sports, and he quit his sport before he went to college because he was more of a ball player than he was a professional athlete or an aspiring athlete. And I look at how they each kind of move forward, and I think about the parents that I've interacted with as a baseball dad and as a hockey dad. And I just see us as parents, as grandparents, we're feeding into this programming of the kids at the expense of community little league, at the expense of community organizations that could draw from a better population if people weren't peeled off to go to 4 AAU, private sports teams and going to national tournaments every weekend and doing all these other things.
I was just gonna say, my two granddaughters are dancers. And same thing, they're athletes. To me, it's teaching them discipline, good health, a lot of life skills that are not gonna be available to them when you finish high school or college. Because, you can't make a living being a dancer. But, they do their thing 4 or 5 times a week. They find time, they get their homework done. And those are life skills, I think, that are really important,
Absolutely.
the discipline in particular. So I see it as a good thing. I don't know whether, you were, it's scary that
It can be.
there's gonna be a vacuum there.
I will say this, as a father of a daughter athlete, and I love the fact that my daughter never got caught up in drama with school, with friends, social environment. She was too focused on what she needed. She was a great student, hard worker.
Yeah.
She was the empath on the team. She wasn't recruited for hockey. I love her story so much because she was recruited to go to a different school because of rowing. She didn't get into the school she wanted to for hockey. She chose her school as opposed to her sport. And then she figured out a way to walk on the hockey team and she graduated as captain.
Wow.
So talk about grit. I mean, to me, it's like, my daughter's my hero. Exactly. And she's like in every way, the student I wasn't, the focus I don't have. Absolutely. Now, that said, because she's thrown so much of her life into that right now, and she's had a change of thought about where to go in the future, she's kind of rethinking things. I don't think deeply in her soul, she's okay with that. She is, but I think there's this feeling of I'm supposed to. And I feel like my job as a parent right now is to help them realize there is no supposed to.
Right.
Right, and that's where I feel like we, as parents, historically, we do this. I mean, my father told me it's a ticket punching society. Get your engineering degree, go do this. This is how the world works. It was imposed on me.
Yeah.
And I think what's so hard for all of us to absorb post-pandemic is the rules are changing.
Yeah.
And they're changing so fast. And like, even like one of the, in addition to Coffee with a Purpose, the other company that was here early, I remember the first summer I was here, there was a company that hired 2 interns. And the CEO of the company said, why don't you go off to ChatGPT and come up with a marketing plan for us? And I looked at the CEO, and I had heard about ChatGPT, but I wasn't using AI yet. And I looked at her, and I was like, well, there goes my MBA. You just basically gave a sophomore in college 15 minutes to do what I would have charged $20,000 to do, a few years ago and work. And she came back and I looked at it because I was really curious, like, what did it come up with? It was like, all right, that's a good structure, but I knew it wasn't there. The problem is the sophistication of the consumer is dropping. And
Well,
So,
to your point, though, AI is also exponentially increasing its efficiency.
Yes.
And I wondered if earlier on, when you were talking about having to close and some people leaving, I wondered if any of that was AI related or whether it's still too early in the process. But that's a big challenge that I don't think anybody is really taking seriously.
Yeah.
My son is very into it. He's using it for coding a lot, and he can manage it and knows where the problems are. But he says, so all the entry level coders in the AI can do it better than they can.
Yes.
Go back and look at Fruit the Card yesterday, talked about the China thing and talked about AI.
Yeah, it's.
I
But-
think the AI thing is an even bigger issue than that because it is the most energy hungry,
Oh, yeah.
most energy consuming thing that we have ever dreamed up and
Renewable
it
energy is
could
not gonna supply
Right.
the.
yeah.
potentially kill us because it is so energy
No,
consuming.
it's fusion, it's micronuclear, all kinds of things that are gonna need to fuel that, but yeah, no, it's funny, I'm actually, if I get the enrollment, I'm teaching a class at Framingham State this fall, in negotiations. And I actually participated in a online forum on AI in education 2 weeks ago, just to kind of hear what teachers around the country are using it for. And, it was hosted by a simulation company that I've used their simulation before. So I kind of knew a couple of the teachers were using that simulation and they were using examples of how they took AI to augment what they were doing with the simulation. I was like, oh, that's interesting. And I reached out to one of them and I said, I'm teaching this class in negotiations. Like, oh, check this out. Somebody had gone into ChatGPT. I guess you can kind of create and make public apps, different things. There's actually a negotiation coach that you can go in, type in what you want your negotiation to be. You can enter, oh, I've never negotiated, or I'm an experienced negotiator and I want to practice. And I actually went through 5 scenarios of how I could negotiate a creative lease extension for this place. And I was blown away at some of the ideas that came up.
Oh, my God.
It was just one of those things. And I was sitting there having this virtual conversation. Now, I am a great prompter because I'm creative, I have experience, and I bring those things. And that's why the entry-level programmer will have a problem. They don't have the life experience or the creativity. I think artists, I think creatives are gonna thrive in this environment with AI because they're gonna know how to get ahead of the
Some of them prompt you though.
Yeah.
Maybe.
So long as
but-
the
But AI can
rules
produce
say-
pictures
yeah.
at 10,000 a minute. That's part of the problem.
Yeah, but
They,
then,
they can produce art, they can produce,
Yeah.
Music, songs,
oh, yeah.
yeah,
all of it.
so.
But
Excuse me, I just got a message from Zoom that said, you guys are talking too much about AI. We're gonna kill the conversation right now. So I don't know. It was Zoom. It wasn't me. So
one of my saddest experiences last week, I scraped off what was supposed to be like a week of just cheap window paint, telling people what was going on in here, stayed up there for 2 years, but I scraped it all off. But one of my favorite comments I came up with earlier, I said, powered by AI, which is actual interaction. I personally think, and I'm starting to talk about this, just kind of wrap up my time. I'd love to keep the conversation going, but, the value of human-centric business and human-centric activities, I think is gonna go up. I look at what happened with records and sort of vinyl and the sort of idea like, oh, well, we can get anything we want. The convenience, the speed, the efficiency of the iPod to digital, and that revolution happened. But then you came back to this visceral experience of hearing a needle hit vinyl and actually the richness of the sound, and other things mattered to people to a point that the value went up. Right, so to me, I think that's gonna happen with people and with people up. I think the biggest value of AI is gonna be filtering out the noise created by AI. It's this generative volume of things, and I definitely had one member in particular has built a whole business as a single entrepreneur. But the coding is done, the marketing is done, all of these things through contractors and AI. And I mean, the type of output this person has been able to generate with technology probably is equated to 10 or 12 employees.
Yeah.
Right, it's fascinating, but at the same time, they still need to talk to an investor. They still need to break through to customers,
Well,
and
now they
that is,
can mirror your voice, but that's a whole nother thing.
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the challenge in the schools is gonna be that teachers can prepare for so many more things using AI than they could without it. But it's the human contact, so what naturally will happen is there'll be fewer teachers with more students, less contact. Students are using the
I
AI.
think it's the experience. I have a really
Yeah.
dear friend who is a professor at UConn. And this is where she's gone into a little bit as a field and started writing about it because she's a linguist and a philosopher. You know, her background brings her into this, and the leading into it was incredibly frustrating. And I think one of the things that comes up, the issue that comes up a lot is that, like you said, I'm a good prompter. I have this life experience. The thing that AI can't actually give you, regardless of how good it is any of that.
Right.
And so as we age out, the AI becomes the experience.
Yeah.
And so it becomes, that's where so many of the problems are foreseen, is because it's not about right this moment. It's about 20 years from now, when we
Yeah.
aren't the ones doing the prompting and the writing, and it's the 20-year-olds
Right.
who grew up on it and used it and sees it as the do all end all. And so it guides them instead of them guiding it and
Well,
them getting
there
their
isn't, not to get
experience.
into this anymore, but there is the sense that when I prompt, say, synchronicity, when I look at their prompts and 1 out of 5 might be good and they keep throwing more. Every time somebody like you prompts it, it's learning again.
Yeah.
So it's gonna become a better prompter, even though every prompt should be individual and different.
But
So we
Yeah,
don't
but
know
that
where-
also means that
to
when
Bill's
it's the
question, we don't know
20-year-olds
where it's
doing
going.
all of the prompting, it's lost all of that,
There
right? Then it
is-
reverts back to.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point, Brinley. When I was, relatively early on in my career, we were growing 30% a year and it was going crazy, and the company assigned me to corporate to do training. And I would try to tell the new people all the dumb stuff I did when I was learning. Don't do this, don't do that, don't do that other thing. And they didn't do those things, but they did 3 other dumb things that I never did.
Right.
Whereupon I came up with Sarah's motto, there's always a new way for things to get screwed up. And I think people have to go through that process. And you can tell them all the dumb things you did, but they've still gotta have that experience of doing dumb stuff.
Spoken like a
There
parent.
is we do have
I
a,
think Donna McKenzie's got her hand up. Yeah. Donna, do you want to weigh in?
Yes, not specifically on that point, but as time moves on, I just want to express my appreciation for this conversation. I'm absolutely loving the discussion that Paul Joseph has stimulated, and I'm writing down books. I feel like I've got reading for the rest of the summer. It's just been amazing, and I'm especially appreciative of his thoughts on change, because I think it's spot on. And I just like, how do we help ourselves and help other people become open to change? And it's not an easy thing. I remember a college friend who had no interest in math taking calculus. And I'm like, why are you taking calculus? And it's all about change. And if I don't understand and I'm not open to change, I'm going to have a terrible life. And the more I've heard Paul talk this morning, I think that's so true. And I went to the wind phone yesterday, and I'm thinking, well, this is like kind of a reconfiguration of kind of what the cathedrals were, right? Spaces between here and eternity, and it's very beautiful. And I just think it's exciting, and I want to express my deep appreciation for the depth of this conversation that he has facilitated and the kind of space that he has allowed this group to share. And I can't wait to hear more from you, Paul Joseph, in the future. I'm excited about your studies, and you are like you're like a natural teacher. Honestly, it isn't often these days that I take so many notes about what I should be reading and so on from somebody speaking. So thank you. Thank you so much.
That's a nice testimonial. Of course, usually all we have to do is copy the chat from all of the links that Brinley puts in, as she's done again this morning. I don't know how you do it, Brinley, but
AI.
AI. Right. Actually, Zoom does provide summaries of meetings now. That's been pretty interesting to see. Are people seeing that with their doctor visits lately, by the way? You see the notice or get asked, by the way, is it okay if AI listens to our conversation and it'll produce a summary? Wow.
I think a lot of it, I don't know what your sort of stay-at-home job is and what you do when you're not, during the preamble, I think you're gonna talk. A little
Yeah,
bit about that.
which it's a good segue into sort of that and where I'm going, but this whole idea, and Donna, thank you for bringing up what you said about this just sort of change. You know, for me, it really, the last book I kind of flashed up was Living Untethered, Michael Singer. He wrote the book called, I think it was Untethered was the first one. And then, the Surrender Experiment was the second one. He's written a couple of bestsellers. He's basically a kind of a yogi or Buddhist kind of philosopher guy, who actually started a $1 billion company once he decided not to get a doctorate in economics. So fascinating read on things, but it just, for me, it kind of, it's that recentering on, you know, my son got married earlier this year. He converted to Catholicism. You know, I grew up Orthodox, and I've been thinking about bigger things and this whole nature of change, these structures that we place ourselves into. So that was a really interesting connection between the cathedrals and the wind phone, Donna. I totally get it. And the more I see, while change is inevitable, nothing's new. Like everything we're wrestling with, we've been wrestling with for decades. We're just, how we're doing it's different. My experience in going back a little bit to go forward to answer your question, Carrie, One of the best experiences I had as a young consultant was to go to Austin, Texas and open an office right out of grad school. And it was during the e-commerce explosion in the dot-com era, late nineties, early 2000s. And when things collapsed, I remember, this is sort of collective, what do we do next moment. But I also remember vividly that these services that we provide, a lot like what Sarah was saying about how we did things, all of a sudden I was selling, 5 to 6 figure consulting projects. I was competing against $5,000 or $1,000 projects because people could take a website and do a survey and all of a sudden became a consultant. And the parallel to today is the consumer was becoming less and less sophisticated, less and less experienced, and felt that was good enough. They didn't appreciate the experience and the value of asking the right questions, being objective and all these other things. They just assumed a survey is a survey is a survey. And so because the buyer, the consumer was less engaged and less sophisticated, the quality went down for a long time. And I see the same thing with AI, right? And in the parallel, when I worked for a software company, one of my favorite sales guys walked in once and he was very flustered about something. He threw a document on my desk and said, "Paul, buyers are liars." And he was done. And I said, what's the problem? He's like, "Well, we just spent the last 6 months working with this prospect. We told them exactly what our roadmap is. We developed all of the things they asked us to do, and they still refused to buy. They moved the goalposts on us." And basically, people don't know what they want. Right? It's that Steve Jobs was famous for basically saying that they don't know they need the iPod yet, or the iPhone yet, right? They did, they just didn't realize the value of having it compact in one thing. They wanted a camera and a phone and a web browser. But this idea that, and I take this to my town work too. It's like, people want what they say they want, and then when you give it to them, they want more, or it's not good enough, right? It's like, I want better transparency, boom, better transparency, where are you? Right, so we fix the problem, and yet here we are, you're not engaging in the solution. So that's, I think, just always been around, and I think it's always on us to figure out ways to engage it. One of the things, and Carrie, I haven't forgotten your question, I'm coming back to it. This is ADD brain Paul going. But what really struck me about what Rick was saying about AI learning, I can't remember the book that I was reading at the time did talk about, it might have just been an article, when IBM Watson first came out, and was it Kasparov? He played chess against Watson, and they ended up beating Kasparov and all those things. That was the big wake-up call for AI. But then subsequent to that, Google had a competition for the game Go, which is, I guess, an Asian game, strategy game. I don't know it personally. It's much more sophisticated than chess, from what I understand. Wow. And it beat a human master, a grandmaster at that. What they found was 4 years after, I think they did a longitudinal study of people competing in Go. Excuse me for a minute.
Yeah, I wanna say hey to that.
I'll give another plug for Ezra Fine. He's done, if you're interested, search his things on attention. He's the best interviewer I've ever heard by far.
Yeah.
And he's brought on guests on attention. He's been on that for 2 years. And every episode ends with 3 book recommendations. And I always look at them, to see if there's one that I'm interested in. And half the time there is. And I do what he does, is get a pile out of the library, read as much as I can possibly read, and return it, and then I'm on to something else.
See, that's my problem. I buy all of these and I write notes in them, so I can't return them. But that's
Buy some, I'd like to support bookstores,
But anyway, getting back to the AI thing with Go, what they found was, I think it was 4 years after the fact, there was a significant spike in the rankings of Go players. Because humans learned from the machine moves that the machine used to beat the human. So this notion of augmented human learning, I think we're gonna see an era of humans learning at a much better rate. So I'm optimistic about AI if we can figure it out. I'm hoping the nefarious, shadow governments and all this snooping devices that are on our prompts and all that don't bring us down. But anyway, my other life, the work that I try to do, and that I'm working towards, going backwards, I'm actually gonna be matriculating in September at Babson College. It's their inaugural doctoral program in business administration. So 30 years to the date that I started my MBA at Babson, I'm starting. Yeah,
And you're gonna run there.
and yes, Chicago. With my daughter, so she has something to focus
Are
on.
you going this time?
Yeah.
I'll be there.
Oh, it is?
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Wedding.
Excellent.
Yeah.
All right, we'll connect.
Good, good.
But so the impetus for me to go, to be honest with you, I was thinking about a terminal degree for many years. I always thought I'd either get a master's in psychology or organizational psychology and do something, because I love the interplay of people and systems. And so Babson launched this thing. I heard an ad on the radio in January. So out of the blue, I'm like, all right, one kid's graduated, one kid's married, I got time, we can maybe make it work. So God bless my wife. She's like, all right, get some focus.
You miss those college, those educational bills, I guess. huh?
Yeah, exactly.
Close the business.
So, but having been a student there and having taught there, I also thought, I'd be a good first candidate for them, because I know they're gonna be getting the kinks out of the system for 2 or 3 years beforehand. So I'll be a vociferous consumer
You'll end up a professor there.
well, we'll see. Wherever, I'd love to be back. I mean, it's something I did enjoy teaching there.
Yeah.
But in talking to the people, the reason I read Abundance, actually, was one of my interviews for Babson. One of the professors I was talking to suggested I read it based on our interactions. I would love to, as a dissertation direction, take what I've observed and done locally with economic development and regionally with economic development and figure out a way, and this goes to housing. How can we use capitalism and commerce as the municipal mechanism for sustained housing solutions? So it started talking about how do you integrate all of these concepts into things, because we've got that affluence here, but we can't seem to crack it into a housing model that works. There's got to be better ways to do that. So that's one thought. The other thought is the other work that I've been doing professionally. So for the last couple of years, for many years, actually, I've licensed a simulation that was developed by a professor friend of mine at Babson. It's called TechMark. TechMark is a business model that basically puts business students to compete against one another. And over the years, it was used as the onboarding exercise for all the MBA program students at Babson. Bob Ang is the author of that. He's actually Chinese American, but he's developed a thriving business in China through partnerships that we've developed that deliver TechMark to executive education, executive MBA programs, and then it proliferates into the businesses. So there's been literally tens of thousands of Chinese business people trained on his simulation. What he found a few years ago was they wanted to understand how to train managers to deal with change and ambiguity. So he started embracing this model called VUCA. VUCA stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And VUCA was actually developed as a framework at the US Army War College as a way to train soldiers who are basically hierarchical thinkers and structured thinkers into how do you respond to those moments when the model doesn't match.
Say it again.
VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So Bob started doing some work over there. I reached out to a colleague of mine in Israel right after October 7th to see how his family was doing and to see how he was. This is a former consultant I worked with and did some business development with. And his name is Menachem Student. Menachem and I started talking about this VUCA work. And I said it would be interesting to see how Israeli businesses are responding, how they responded to October 7th and what they're doing now in the shadow of that and with all the conflict that's going on. I've always been impressed with how Israelis can filter and focus and do things in this environment. He and I have embarked, he's interviewed 30 CEOs, and I actually talked to a friend of mine who's Iranian by origin. He immigrated years ago and started a business. He was in the World Trade Towers when they collapsed. He was on a very high level floor and got his entire firm out. But I was curious about what he did the day after, the month after, and all that. So we're trying to study how are systems and groups of people responding to crisis. And so that was the other piece of the work that we're doing right now. Menachem, myself, and another gentleman in Copenhagen are co-authoring an article now on VUCA leadership and how do you take leadership under uncertainty? how do you train people to be leaders when we don't know what the future is? I mean, we've basically got VUCA in the administration right now. As soon as Trump has a Sharpie in his hand, you don't know what's gonna happen. In all seriousness, I mean, so we don't know. Part of the problem we've got right now is unpredictability,
It's
right?
the
So.
flip side of my motto. There's always a new way for things to get messed up.
Always, but we don't know. So what motivated me, kind of taking this whole conversation to a sort of crescendo is I actually thought to Menachem, I'm like, someday, not yet, but we can lay the groundwork. You can have AI essentially look at large data model sets and say, okay, with disparate pieces of information that human beings can't possibly be considering, we might be able to create a barometer for crisis. So take that to the extreme of a school shooting. You know, I was thinking, and I have actually talked to chief of police about this. I've talked to public safety in other places. What if in Uvalde, Texas, there was a model that basically said unemployment is up, child support payments are down, you know, after school programs are being cut, whatever, you know, different pieces of information come
Gun sales
together.
are up.
Gun sales are up, yeah, that might be the obvious one, right? And so all of a sudden you go from this model where it's like, maybe you have the school resource officer can basically have that DEFCON of saying, you know what, things are ripe for something to happen. We should probably put more resources towards this or that. Use technology to be the canary in the coal mine. Military people say that's seeing just around the corner, right? When you're in sort of, you know, tactical mode, you have to be able to anticipate. Nobody knew that COVID-19 was going to hit. But any business that has a global supply chain should have been prepared for a disruption in that supply chain. And you can do that through scenario planning, you can do that through strategic planning, but VUCA takes it back one step further to say, how do you trust that guy at NORAD that's watching blips on a screen to pick up the red phone when it's an actual missile as opposed to a goose that's flying across or something like that? So you need to culturally change people and systems to anticipate. And so for me intellectually, that's an interesting question to answer too. So those are the two options I'm looking at for my dissertation.
It sounds like you're taking four abstract or semi-abstract concepts and trying to just.
Yeah. See where it plays. Yeah.
Makes me think of psychohistory, Isaac Asimov's concept
Mm.
from years ago
Mhm.
that depended on a massive understanding
Yeah.
of society and trends and, you know, that only could be done with this enormous data power of figuring stuff like that out. It's a,
We're coming into it. I've never read Asimov, but that's a, yeah, that's a.
Oh, the foundation.
You've never read Asimov. Oh my God, you gotta go back to fiction, Paul.
it's a foundation.
Foundation is.
I'm going back to people telling me what to read as opposed to me stumbling into it. so.
Short stories, right?
Exactly, yeah, I want big print and a lot of pictures.
So I'll step back in the moderator role with Doug wants to, and I think we are pretty much at the end of our allotted time, and we could keep going forever. I think we started with the history and future of Metroworks. We got into the history and future of Natick, and now we're into the future of civilization. So, I don't think we're gonna totally resolve everything. but,
I don't know who the poor unfortunate sucker is that's gonna speak at your next meeting, but. I'm just kidding.
Thank you very much, Paul.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Thank you for that.
thank you so much. It's been enriching and stimulating. I think Donna touched on it. And somebody should speak about what the wind phone is. I just heard very briefly about it at church service on Sunday, but I don't think I know the more of the story. Does anybody know?
The artist is Amy Adams. So Amy has done a couple of installations in town. She lives in Franklin now. She used to be a Natick resident, but she basically created a wind phone outside of the Common Street Spiritual Center. And the wind phone was a concept that was designed, I guess it was a Japanese artist that came up with the idea of a way to connect with people who've passed on as a way to grieve publicly. So it's a place that's basically a phone booth for people to go, and there's literally a rotary phone in it. And you can pick up the phone and talk to a loved one. And the idea is a way to process your grief and to kind of share that moment in time. So Amy built a bench and a space that's wide enough to accommodate a chair. It's decorated beautifully with, you know, art is sort of, she had dogwoods that represent the symbolism of a tree you plant when somebody passes on, and different symbols, like there's a cardinal there, there's a hummingbird there. There are different sort of visual stimuli to talk about. sort of, the grieving process. And so it's sitting in the, like right at the edge of the Common Street Spiritual Center entrance. I encourage you to go.
Great. And Donna, did you want to add to that?
Hard to add to that lovely description, but she also included solar lights. So actually somebody could sit as the sun was setting or it was getting dark. And there's a QR code that you can scan that includes resources for grieving. And I know that. I mean, sometimes you don't know. We don't have like a Paul Joseph who can spit out like the best books on grief or something for us to use as resources. So I think that that is really an invaluable service. And I'm kind of skeptical about everything. When I went, I thought, well, you can try to talk to dead people everywhere. Why do we need like a special phone booth? But the power of this symbolism being on the side of like this Baptist community meeting space is just unbelievable. And it's very, very beautiful. And everything that Paul Joseph said about the arts in Natick and the Natick Cultural Center. I mean, Natick has done just a fabulous job of this. And this is something that I think we'll all grow to love even more with time. So it's very, very beautiful. So just go sit and think.
It may be the same artist that did the mental health sculpture and bench across the common at First Congregational Church a couple of years ago. And the bench, by the way, is, although the figures from that sculpture are no longer there. The bench itself remains in the northwest garden on the church property. Paul, you alluded to who the next brave Coffee with a Purpose speaker was that could possibly follow this. So just our typical logistical notice, we kind of end the session. Just a reminder, we're on the cusp of August here. And so we'll be taking the entire month of August off, hopefully giving lots of folks time to go on adventures and enjoy some time away. And then of course there's Labor Day weekend. So the Monday after Labor Day is when we'll resume. And I think, although it's summertime, a lot of people are hard at work on various things. I know the CPC's busy reviewing letters of interest. Town meeting will be just around the corner. We'll definitely look to get Jeff and Todd back to help us prep for that meeting. So there'll be a lot of town stuff to talk to, and I think some pretty interesting speakers beginning in September again.
And as usual, if you have any ideas that you want to put forward or arrange with people, please.
I
contact
am
us.
still working on Dr. Spash.
Great.
Yeah. Oh, good. Yeah. And actually a special shout out to Cindy and to Brinley. And I know I'm forgetting at least one or two others that have identified and brought speakers to our sessions. Doesn't all have to be Martin and myself finding these folks. So it's been
Curious if anybody has an interest in a transportation one, where we would talk about 927 and we would talk about the train, commuter rail, sorry.
Right.
Is there any interest in that?
Yeah,
Type of thing?
27 is a done deal. I mean, this, you can just talk about the physics of the construction. There's no choice, there's no.
Oh, I just meant if there was an interest in having a conversation about it, if people needed to see pictures of it and talking about it and talk about the time frame of it or changes in the rail. I just was curious if there was a transportation thing or a Main Street or just an hour focused on transportation in Natick.
Yeah, Josh would probably be interested.
I'm sorry?
Josh, does Josh still have the transportation? Or is he?
Josh Ostroff. Yeah.
I don't
Because I think he's maybe a complete.
think so you mean specifically for Natick?
Yeah.
I don't think so
Yeah,
anymore,
we
but he
we can
would,
find somebody, but
yeah.
we also.
he could still do that
yeah,
for us.
So
I'm
we
sure.
can, we also talked about, talking about West Natick, which is still a decision to be made. And of course, the Johnson School, which is still a decision to be made. So hopefully we'll cover all this stuff in the fall. We'll have a interesting program that has not yet been scheduled. So
Yeah.
look forward to it.
As an aside on West Natick, one of the things, and this is sort of a dream of mine, I did talk to somebody that talks about, that works with affordable housing. And has experience in the city of Cambridge and the city of Boston. he unfortunately was of the mind that the state legislature works on its 2-year
Yeah.
cycles. Things.
I think I also want to let folks know, Ricky has been trying to step in as well. Ricky, you just got to come off mute though. Sorry to interrupt you, Paul.
I was just saying, but the concept of
There
housing.
you go. Yeah.
Am I off mute?
Yes, you are. Yeah.
Well, first of all, I have to ask, when I finally got on, I couldn't hear what Paul was saying. What is this about the end of your space, Paul?
Yeah, I'm closing the one on the common, Ricky, and keeping the original location, but this space, I've had some just for personal and economic reasons, have to shut this one down.
Okay, the other thing is, I want to say that when you were talking about the feeling of a pushback from a segment of the town to new people coming in, it really reminded me of when we got active in the late 60s and early 70s in the town committee and in changing the direction of some of the local politics and starting native good government. And I think in some measure, you're feeling this perhaps more pronouncedly because of the visuals that all of a sudden there's so much construction that's been on the drawing boards for almost 10 years, some of it. And it was invisible to people generally if you weren't connected. And all of a sudden, there's so much new construction, it sort of hits you in the face. And I think I'm not surprised at the pushback by local people, even people who became local, like Jay and me. We've been looking forward to that sort of renaissance of the downtown, but it is a little jarring to see so much happen all at once in a concentrated space. I'm really excited and wondering what the mechanism is for filling all those first floor spaces. Did you cover any of that until I came on the scene here? Is that all, is that done by the builders of each building? Or is there some input from the town planner or your development corporation, such as it is, to populating the space?
The EDC does not have the resources to do anything proactively. As individuals, we do reach out. I will say there is a collaboration among those interests. So somebody might approach the town and go through Amanda Loomis's office, the Community and Economic Development Office. Somebody might approach the town and go to Heather Rockwood at the Cultural District and Natick Center Associates office. You know, we know people just from other businesses. I've actually reached out to a couple of businesses that are potentially interested in Natick. But again, doing it on an ad hoc voluntary basis when I have a second is no way to do this in a concerted, smart way. So my gripe has always been, we don't have an owner of the prospecting and we don't have the Walmart greeter for Natick, right? We don't have that person that's welcoming somebody in, showing them what we've got, and then connecting them to the right person. So it really has been a reactive process.
Now, is that person being contemplated to hire such a person specifically for that job?
Definitely not in the town's office. I've always argued the Community Economic Development Office, even when at full capacity, is under-resourced, and it has been since I've been politically active. That office could use 3 to 5 more people. End of story. It's the linchpin of how we do things. We have not funded it as such. The Economic Development Committee does not have a budget, does not have teeth. So there's no place to hire somebody unless we were to do it. And that's part of why my push to do things privately comes in. I think we can get the money from outsiders if we have a vision, create a chamber of commerce like advocacy, where it's like, it's in Natick's interests, we would roll into the Metro West Chamber and have, regional relevance too, but we don't have a point of contact and we don't have the the town is just not gonna put dollars towards that position, given all the other liens on the budget right now. I don't see it happening. I could be wrong, but we've underutilized the local options taxes for economic development. We put it into capital and we put it into other things.
Other towns I heard do have people that are, towns and cities, have people that are responsible for bringing in the right business to the right location.
Oh, we could, I'm not optimistic that we will, it's given the budget battles and all the other things going on right now, we haven't for the last many years, so I don't see why something would change now.
Well,
I'd love
you
that.
say
Prove me wrong.
you don't see why it would change now. I mean, here we have the bricks and mortar on the ground. I mean, it's real. It's not just and the opportunities are there. You would think that now there would be a real impetus to do that.
I agree.
Ricky, there's a bunch of us that talk about that all the time.
Yeah.
We drive around and notice that there's no coming soon signs in any of them.
Right.
Spaces, and that by now, normally there would be,
Right.
at this stage of a finished
Yeah, well, I will say.
plan, there would normally be signs in many of these stores
Yeah.
that say coming
I
soon.
keep waiting for the first ribbon cutting. I'm ready to come.
So I will say, in a recent conversation, one elected official told me that the Metro West Chamber, one of the developers had gone to the Metro West Chamber to help them find tenants, because now they've had to go to a realtor and they need the help getting the realtor the leads. And the Metro West Chamber is supposedly helping now connect them with prospects for tenants. And the reason they went to the Metro West Chamber is there's no place to go in Natick. So, and to me, having been at the Metro West Chamber, it'll work for a little while, but they have professional staff that can help them. So for me, this is part of the urgency of privatizing and funding somebody to do exactly that kind of work.
Well, I will say also, which I haven't said out loud too much, but I will say, I also feel like with an organization as big as Trask and Stonegate, who have been so focused on Natick and doing so well in Natick in terms of getting their bids and their properties, it seems to me that as a business, it would have behooved them to say, I need an economic development person on my staff so that I am working towards making sure that I'm going to be successful in filling all these spaces up front by having someone that says, okay, I'm gonna look at the town from the get-go and say, oh, with all of this much building, I want a little grocery store and a little drugstore and I don't want, you know what I mean? It just seems to me that
Builders are builders.
I know builders are builders, but this is 2025.
Could be the other way, could be the other way around.
Yes.
Having come from Needham a long time ago, when Needham didn't have any restaurants other than family restaurants, and look at it now. I mean, in that Ripple, I was surprised it didn't happen in Wellesley, but I assume without knowing that probably there were structural reasons why it didn't. Now it's happened in Wellesley. Natick is the next place because Trask has built all of this $2 million housing and stuff that's out here. People are looking for it, and they don't want to go to Route 9.
That's my point. I feel like
So I think it's
it's
gonna
been a
happen.
bad
It's gonna
business
happen by
plan for them
default,
not
but
to have.
It shouldn't have
By
to happen by
default.
default because it's ready now.
Yeah.
These developers are gonna sit there.
And half of these developments should have been built before the pandemic.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of
Yeah.
should have, armchair quarterbacking of the history here, right? That's part of the problem. This has been an uphill battle ever since. And again, you can't fight it part-time as a volunteer.
Yes.
It's inertia. I mean, and to be honest, and I did talk about this at one of these, I think a while ago. My big fear right now is we're going through the gentrification process. So you've got a disparate sort of set of rents based on old properties and the new rents. And that disconnect is probably keeping new tenants away because it's like, well, do I have the density and the affluence in Natick yet? Because until those houses are full, you're not gonna get the foot traffic. So we've got a chicken and an egg problem here. My big fear is that we're gonna have this sort of, tectonic plate shift that all of a sudden we're gonna go, boom, it's gonna look like Wellesley very quickly. And I respect and appreciate what the cultural district members, in particular the retailers, I think about Jill Horahan, who's now on the board of Natick Center Associates. She owns Metro Pets. She started the Hive. She's cultivating people to come out. I think about Ginger from McEachern, from Five Pros. And Deb Sayer, and the people that have been at this for many years, that actually go out and actively cultivate people to come in and take this. That's what it's taken, but it shouldn't have to be that way. We shouldn't rely on just that individual.
Well, I know that I personally know several people who wanted to be in the block. That are the types of businesses that I think would be really cool and really fun downtown, and they were like, there's zero way in my small business. That I will ever be able to afford the rent to make this work, because I'll just be working to pay the rent. I won't be working to pay the utilities, I won't be working to pay myself or my staff. Or any of the equipment or any of this or that, or I'll literally just be working to pay the rent. And that concerns me that we're in a situation where.
Well, I think, off the record, are we still recording? We're still recording, yeah. Never mind, I won't say it.
And this is the problem with having a public economic.
We got to end the recording.
I think we're probably ready to sign
Yeah,
off
no,
officially. Okay,
Yeah.
so our official
Yeah,
section.
that's
is good. So you all-
To Donna's point, sorry, Donna, A Year of Magical Thinking by Joan Didion is a great
Yes.
book on grief.
Yeah.